Okay, this is the second part of section 4.4, where we're factoring quadratic expressions. Now we're going to factor trinomials. Remember, trinomial is an expression with three terms in it. And we're going to factor the trinomial of ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is going to be 1 or negative 1. We'll start with that first, and then we'll move on after that. Two objectives here. We're going to factor ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is equal to 1 and a is equal to negative 1. Okay. So as we look at how we're going to go through and do these types of problems, I've got some steps here for you, and you're going to find out that these steps, there's only a couple of steps that are new, and the other steps you're going to find out we're going to end up factoring with grouping in this as well. So if you understood how to factor by grouping, then this should really be pretty easy for you. First thing we want to do is we want to take the a term and the c term and multiply them together. So we want to take the two outside terms, the a and the c, the first term here and the third term, and we're going to multiply those guys together. Okay, the a and the c. Then we're going to take what we get when we multiply those and figure out, give me two things that will add up to be the middle term b. So what you're going to see a lot of is you're going to see me draw an x here. Okay, and I'm going to take and put a times c on the top. I'm going to put b on the bottom. And what I need to do is I need to find two numbers that will add up to be b and will multiply to be whatever our a times c is. Okay, and you'll see me go through an example and you'll understand what that means here. Once we figure out what the factors of a times c are that add up to be the middle term, then we're going to replace the middle term with those two factors, with those two numbers. I mean, in this case, I'll put an x and a y here. I would replace that middle term with those two types of things. Okay? Once you have the four terms, then life's going to be really easy because now you have four terms, so you're going to factor it by grouping. Okay? Again, your answer is going to be in the form of two binomials when you get done. And finally, number 6 here, x squared can never be negative. The first term, we talked about this a little bit today in class, the first term can never be negative. So if it is negative, we have to factor out a negative 1. And we'll go through an example like that as well. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at the first example. Now, first thing you got to figure out here, we've got x squared plus 9x plus 20. We've got a trinomial, and what I need to figure out here is what is a and what is c. So again, a is always the first term. It's always the number in front of x squared. So if you look here and there's no number there, if there's no number there, remember a is going to be 1. C is always the last term, and c in this case is going to be 20. Okay. C in this case is going to be 20. So let me write this here so you guys can read this a little bit better. A is going to be 1, C is 20. Okay, A is 1 and C is 20. And what we're going to do is we're going to take and we're going to multiply A times C together. Well, 20 times 1 is 20. Okay, and what you're looking for now is I need to figure out, okay, what's the middle term? Well, if you look at the trinomial here, the middle term, the middle number is 9. So I need numbers that multiply to be 20 that add to be 9. So I need to find two numbers that multiply to be 20 and add to equal 9. Okay. Now, sometimes the easiest way to do this, again, if you have small numbers like this, the easiest way to do this would be to take and write out, okay, 20. What are the factors of 20? I've got 1 and 20. I've got 2 and 10. I've got 4 and 5. Okay. So which one of these sets, if you were to add the two numbers together, will equal 9? Well, that happens to be 4 and 5. Okay. So now that I've found those factors, put a 5 here and a 4 here. Okay. So this is what we're looking to do quite a bit here. Okay. Now, so what I'm going to do now, once I found those factors, again, I'm going to take the middle term and I'm going to replace it with those two factors. And it doesn't matter what order those two factors are in. And I'm going to rewrite my trinomial now into a polynomial with 4 terms. Okay? So now I've got a polynomial here with 4 terms. I've got x squared plus 5x plus 4x plus 20. And now it's no different than what we did for today's lesson. I'm going to do factoring by grouping. So I'm going to put parentheses around the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. Okay, these first parentheses here, they both have an x in common. I divide the numbers. 1 divided by 1 is 1. I have 2 x's. I'm taking an x away, so I only have 1 x left. 5 divided by 1 is 5. I have an x. I took it away, so I don't have it anymore. What do they have in common between 4 and 20? Well, 4 goes into both. Do they both have a variable? No, they don't both have a variable, so I'm not going to take out a variable. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. I have an x I have an x. I'm not taking any away, so it stays there. And 20 divided by 4 is 5, same as we had before. And now if you look at the binomial, what do they both have in common? They both have an x plus 5 in common, with outside the parentheses is an x plus 4 left over. Okay? Now, one way that you can go back through and check this is you can FOIL this binomial. If you FOIL that binomial, you should end up with the trinomial of x squared plus 9x plus 20 as an answer. So you can always go back and check yourself. Okay, let's take a look at the next example, number 2. Okay, we've got x squared plus 14x minus 72. Now things are a little bit different because they're not all positives. So I need to take a is 1, c is negative 72. A times c is negative 72. So I need factors of negative 72 that add to the middle term, which in this case happens to be 14. Okay, so now this is where your multiplication chart is going to come in pretty handy here. Okay, because 72 is kind of a hard number to remember, and it's got to be negative. So if the number is negative, then what's true about one of the factors? One of the factors is going to have to be negative. Okay, so as I look at the factors of negative 72, I've got 1 and 72. 1 and negative 72, negative 1 and positive 72. If I multiply these guys, they make negative 72. Well, we've got negative 2 and 36, and positive 2 and negative 36. So far, have any of these added up to be 14? No. Let's see here. Let's take a look at 4. Actually, let's take a look at 3. Let's go negative 3. And if I figure negative 3, let's see, it should be 24, and 3 and negative 24. If I add those two together, did they get 14? No. So if I try negative 4 and positive 18, or 4 and negative 18, do any of these add to be 14? Well, yeah. If I take positive 18 and negative 4, those two numbers, if I add them together, will give me 14. So I found them. So I've got negative 4 and positive 18. So I'm going to take this middle term, replace it with a negative 4 and a negative 4x and a positive 18x. And write down the rest of my trinomial. And now it becomes a polynomial with 4 terms. Parentheses around first 2 and last 2. Okay, now that we've done this a few times, I'm going to go a little bit faster here with this grouping here. So I'm going to take out an x. And if I take out an x, I'm going to be left with an x and a minus 4. Remember, divide the numbers. Subtract the exponents. 18 and 72. 18 goes in there. And I'm left with an x minus 4. If I look there between the two items, I have an x minus 4 in common and an x plus 18 left over. And now your answer is 2 binomials, and you're finished with number 2. Okay, now let's take a look at example number 3. This time you'll notice it's a little bit different than example number 2. The minus sign is in the middle. We have a positive term. So again, a times c. A is 1, c is 30. So a times c, again, is going to be 30. And you'll notice, again, as we go through these, a lot of these are going to be the exact same as c for right now. It's not always going to be that way. So I need factors of 30 that add to the middle term of negative 11. Now, again, these factors of 30, in order to get a positive number, like if I put down 1 and 30, would I ever have a chance to make a negative number if I add them together? No. But if I make them both negative, I can get a negative number. So I'm looking here for a negative number now. So we've got 1 and 30. We got negative 2 and negative 15. We've got negative 3 and negative 10. We've got negative 5 and negative 6. And if you look at the list of these numbers, obviously, yes, I could put down the positive numbers too, but the positive numbers are never going to give me a negative number if I want to add them together. So, look at, right there are our two we're looking for. So again, I'm going to replace this middle term with my two factors, negative 5x and negative 6x. Bring down the 30 and bring down the x squared. Now you'll notice again, it doesn't matter what order you put the two middle terms. It doesn't matter. You're still going to come up with the same answer. So, parentheses around first two and last two. In the first two, they both have an x in common. I'm left with an x and a minus 5. Again, if I take and subtract the exponents and divide the numbers, that's what you'll come up with. Here I'm going to take out a 6, and I'm left with an x and minus 5. Again, negative 6 divided by negative 6 is positive 1. I had an x, I didn't take any away, I still have it. And then 30 divided by negative 6 is negative 5, and you'll notice they both have an x minus 5 in common with an x minus 6 left over. Okay. Again, I'm going to quickly show you if we FOIL this out, first times first. We'll go here. First times first is x squared. Outsides is negative 6x. Insides is negative 5x. And last is positive 30. And I end up with an x squared minus 11x plus 30. Again, same thing that I started out with. Okay, so you can always FOIL your answer to check it. Okay, example number 3. Let's take a look here at example number 4. Now, as you look at example number 4, what do you notice is a little bit different? You'll notice that the first term is negative. Okay, we cannot have a negative first term. So, what I want to do with this here right now is I want to take a negative 1 out, away from everything. By taking a negative away from everything, it's going to switch the sign on each term. Okay, so if I take a negative 1 away, this is going to now be an x squared minus a 14x and minus 32. Okay. Now, I'm going to take this and I'm going to circle it and I'm going to draw an arrow to the bottom. Okay, so that way I don't forget it at the end. Okay, so now I'm looking for factors of negative 32 that add to negative 14. Okay, so as I look at these, I've got negative 1 and 32, 1 and negative 32, 2 and negative 16, and negative 2 and positive 16. Now, any one of these add to negative 14? Sure they do. I don't need to go any further because those guys right there, 2 and negative 16. So again, I'm going to replace this middle term with a positive 2x and a negative 16x minus 32. Bring down the x squared. Factor by grouping. This guy, you're going to take out an x, and you're left with an x plus 2. Over here, you're going to take out a 16, and you're going to be left with an x plus 2. Again, negative 32 divided by negative 16 is positive 2. So, I have an x plus 2 in common. I have an x minus 16 left over, and don't forget, the reason I drew that arrow is so that I don't forget that negative 1 out front. Okay, so anytime you have a negative first term, your squared term is negative, you always have to get rid of that. Okay, always have to get rid of that. Okay, let's take a look here at example number 5. Again, we'll go through this quickly here because it's pretty much the same thing. Again, we got to take out a negative 1 because we can't have a negative first term, which leaves an x squared minus 13x and a plus 12. So I need factors of positive 12 of c, and this a times c, 1 times 12, that add to negative 13. Okay, so I write down my factors of 12. I've got 1 and 12, but don't forget you have negative 1 and negative 12 as well, and bingo, I found them. So negative 1 and negative 12. So that's what's going to replace my middle term. Negative x and negative 12x. Or negative 1x would be the same thing here, instead of just a negative x. Okay, again, circle this guy, draw your arrow to the bottom so you don't forget him. Parentheses around the first two and the last two. These guys have an x in common with an x minus 1 left over. And these guys have a 12 in common with an x minus 1 left over. Okay, again, I divide the numbers, subtract the exponents, and they have an x minus 1 in common, and x minus 12 left over, and don't forget, bring down that negative 1. Okay, so again, anytime you have a negative first term, you have to take that negative and factor it out. All right, let's take a look at our page. Okay, this one here is going to factor with GCF first and then factor the trinomial. Okay, so the two steps here that we're going to look at is we're going to find the GCF or find the greatest common factor and factor it out. Take it away from it, and then we're going to factor the trinomial just like we would normally, where we find a times c, find the middle term, and then factor by grouping. Okay, so as you look at all three terms here, what do you notice they all have in common? Well, you'll notice that a 3 goes into all three numbers. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my GCF out, factor the 3 out. 3 divided by 3 is 1, so I've got an x squared. 15 divided by 3 is a 5, so I have a 5x. And 12 divided by 3 is a 4. Again, I'm going to take this 3, just like I did that negative 1, really no different, circle it, put it at the bottom. Okay, so now I'm looking for factors of 4 that add to 5. Okay, well the factors of 4 that add to 5, there's only a couple of them. I've got 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. Well, right there's our winners, 1 and 4. So I replace this middle term. This is going to be 1x and a 4x and a 4 and an x squared. Okay, again, factor by grouping. So I've got to take out an x here. I've got an x plus 1 left over. These guys over here have a 4 in common. Take out a 4, I have an x plus 1 left over. So they have an x plus 1 in common. X plus 1, or excuse me, x plus 4 left over. And don't forget to carry down that 3. Okay, so greatest common factor is really the same thing as taking out a negative 1. It'd be the exact same process. Okay, except for instead of having a negative 1 out front, now you have a number. Now, example number 7 gets to be a little bit more tricky because we've got two variables. You'll notice you have an x and a y. Okay, so as I look at this example, What else do you notice about all the numbers? What else do they all have? They all have a negative. So I don't want this negative first term. So I know I'm at least going to take out a negative number because that first term can't be negative. Okay. So as you look at the numbers, what's the biggest number that will go into 5, 30, and 25? Well, that happens to be a 5. And do each one of these terms all have the same variable? Sure they do. They all have an x. So I'm going to take out a negative 5x. So negative 5 divided by negative 5 is positive 1. I had an x, I took it away, so there's no more x left over. The only thing that's left over is a y squared. Negative 30 divided by negative 5 is positive 6. I had an x, I took it away, I take it away, I don't have any x's left. I have a y, I'm not taking a y away, so I still have it. Negative 25 divided by negative 5 is positive 5. I had an x, I'm taking it away, I don't have anything left over, so now I have taken out the GCF. And now I've got to look at this trinomial. So, I need factors of 5 that add to 6. Well, there's only one way to make 5, and that's 1 and 5, because 5 is a certain kind of number. It's a prime number, so only one will go into it. So those are my two factors. So break this guy down into a 1y and a 6y. Bring down the 5. Bring down the y squared. Again, don't forget, circle this guy. Put your arrow down there so you don't forget him. Really easy habit to forget him. Parentheses around the first two and the last two. These two here have a y in common with a y plus 1 left over. What does 6 and 5 have in common? They don't have anything in common. They both don't have y's, so I'm going to factor out a 1. Whoops, we made a little mistake here. So, it should be a 6, that should be a 5 right there. So we're going to go ahead and we'll just cross this guy out. This should be a 5. There we go. Sorry about that. So now we're going to take out a 5, and they're left over with a y plus 1. They both have a y plus 1 in common with a y plus 5 left over. And don't forget, I took out a negative 5x at the beginning. Okay? So, you can use greatest common factor to factor, take that GCF out and then use factoring a trinomial. You're using grouping. So, essentially, we're using everything that we've learned so far, but we've just added 2 steps to it, where we take and we multiply a times c and find that 2 things that add up to be that middle term. Okay, so this is section 4.4, factoring simple trinomials.